the key components of ACI when it's installed into a data center infrastructure. When Cisco designed ACI, they built it to ride on very specific hardware components. The first of which are the Nexus line of switches. Not just the Nexus though, specifically the Nexus 9Ks. See, Cisco has a history of creating Nexus switches. In fact, there were Nexuses that ranged from the 1Ks, which were the virtual machine virtual switch, and then they had the 2Ks, which were fabric extenders, the 3Ks, which are low-end Nexus switches. Yeah, they even had 4Ks at one time, which slid into an IBM Blade Center chassis. We have 5Ks, 6Ks, and 7Ks. So we had the entire range of Nexus switches in the Cisco portfolio before the Nexus 9Ks were developed. Now, why they skipped the 8Ks is anyone's guess, but either way, the 9Ks are what ACI runs on. ACI cannot run on any of the traditional Nexus switches. So now let's get a little more specific. The Nexus 9500s are chassis switches, sort of like what we've drawn here, where we can slide multiple line cards in and really have very high density switches that take up, more significant rack unit spaces. So these would be the chassis switches. And then Cisco also has the 9300 series, and these are what we call fixed configuration, which largely means that they're 1 or 2 rack unit switches. And these can sometimes have a module in it that can expand your ports, but for the most part, the ports are built into this switch and we can't really do much to expand them. So the roles of these two switch lines, this depends on the environment that they're getting deployed into. For example, sometimes the 9500s will be call it the core layer, or maybe the aggregation layer, and the 9300s can be the access layer. However, these are also fully capable of being the core and aggregation layer for a smaller environment. A lot of it just depends on the port density. But the horsepower, the performance of these switches are all non-blocking. So regardless of the amount of layer 2 traffic that we throw at them, they can handle it. And all of the ports can be inbound, outbound, full bandwidth, full communications at any given time. The next component we need to understand is something we call the Application Policy Infrastructure Controller, or the APIC. The APIC is the SDN controller. So in any SDN environment, we need a controller that we use to log in. This is usually managed via a GUI interface, or, again, we've got those application programming interfaces, APIs, that we can use to control the controller. And so we as humans interface not with the network directly, but with the controller. And the controller is what operates the network devices. So again, coming back to the APIC is Cisco's SDN controller for ACI. And the APIC runs on Cisco UCS servers. So these are, again, UCS rack mount servers, usually 1 rack unit, but they can be sized according to the environment. And these will connect into the Nexus switches in order to control the ACI environment. Usually APICs are deployed in sets of 3, and so we'll have 3 separate APICs in the ACI environment. So again, 3 separate UCS servers that connect into the Nexus switches. So let's take a look and see what this looks like if we build it out in our data center. So ACI operates in a leaf spine architecture, and we're going to cover more of what that means in the future. But for now, let's just think of it as if it's the aggregation layer and access layer. So this is the spine layer, though we're still going to call it spines. And let's say we put 9500 chassis in the spine layer. So now that these are 9500s, they're chassis switches, and they're running in ACI mode. And 9500s and 9300s can actually run in an NXOS mode, but that's not very useful to us when we're studying ACI. So these are running in ACI mode, and we're going to deploy 9300s out on the network edge. So 9300s, 9300s. In fact, let's go ahead and throw 2 more out here. So we'll have a total of 4 9300s. Whoops, there we go, 9300. And those are all going to connect up to those 9500s. And this is where our servers connect. So our servers are going to connect into the 9300s, very similar to data center architectures today. They'd connect in at the access layer. But from an APIC perspective, where are the controllers? Well, the controllers are going to come into the data center here. So again, this is called an APIC, an Application Policy Infrastructure Controller. And that is going to connect up to a pair of those 9300, again, what we call the leaf layer. So this is the spine layer up here, and then we have the leaf layer down here. So we need 3 of those again. So we're going to continue to deploy APICs, APIC, APIC, and APIC. And now that we have 3 of them, we can connect them up to the 9300 layer. And this is what an ACI infrastructure could look like. It's maybe a tad on the smaller side, but it's still not as small as it could be, because we could actually have two 9500s or maybe even two 9300s at the spine layer, and then just two 9300s at the leaf layer. So an ACI fabric, at a minimum, has to be 4 switches. And from there, it can scale up to very large enterprise data center designs. And one more piece of information, by the way, and we alluded to it earlier, but this is managed via a GUI. And so me, as the admin, I'm not coming into the CLI anymore, right? That was the old way of doing things. We're not doing that. Instead, what we're doing is we're logging into the GUI, and the GUI lives on the APIX. So really what's happening here is I, as the admin, leverage the GUI in order to change the APIC behavior. That's where I instantiate that policy, right? I define the policy on those APICs. And the APICs themselves perform the configuration of the ACI infrastructure. ACI has 3 main components we need to pay attention to. The first of which is that Nexus layer, those Nexus 9K switches, whether 9500s or 9300s, it's what forms the physical switch infrastructure for ACI. Then we have those APICs, the Application Policy Infrastructure Controller. We have 3 of those in the environment, and they all connect up to the leaf layer of our ACI leaf spine architecture. Finally, there's that GUI, and really the GUI belongs to the APICs, but it is how we manage the ACI environment. And so knowing those 3 components, we can identify exactly what an ACI fabric consists of. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.